In this presentation, I want to look at a very familiar story found in Genesis, the first book of the Bible. And even if you are not very familiar with the Bible, I'm sure that you most likely would have heard the story of Adam and Eve placed in the Garden of Eden, and a serpent entices her to eat this fruit. Many people say an apple, but the account doesn't say what type of fruit it was, from this tree that they were not supposed to eat from, called the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And that is the reason why we have the misery that we have today in the world. Now, I'm just looking at this from a copywriter slash persuasion perspective. So I'm not looking at it from the religious perspective. I'm just taking this as being literature, as being a story, and not looking at the historicity or anything outside of that. I'm just taking this as a story for the purpose of this presentation. Okay, now here we come to the story that could be found in Genesis 3 verses 1 to 7, and this is the ESV, or the English Standard Version, just to give credit for copyright purposes. Now here we go. It says here that the serpent was more crafty than any other beast of the field that the Lord God had made. And he said to the woman, "Did God actually say, 'You shall not eat of any tree in the garden'?" And the woman said to the serpent, "We may eat of the fruit of the trees in the garden. But God said, 'You shall not eat of the fruit of the tree that is in the midst of the garden, neither shall you touch it, lest you die.' But the serpent said to the woman, 'You will not surely die, for God knows that when you eat of it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil.' So when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and that it was a delight to the eyes, and the tree was to be desired to make one wise, she took of its fruit and ate, and she also gave some to her husband who was with her, and he ate. Then the eyes of both were open, and they knew that they were naked, and they sewed fig leaves together and made themselves loincloths." Now, for reference purposes, I would like to go back to the instructions that were given to the pair that were placed in the garden, so we can compare the words in this passage with the instructions that were given. So here we go back to Genesis chapter 2, this is verse 16 and 17, and this is the instruction that was given by God to this first pair, Adam and Eve. "The Lord God took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to work it and keep it. And the Lord God commanded the man, saying, 'You may surely eat of every tree of the garden, but of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat, for in the day that you eat of it, you shall surely die.'" Now let's go back now to the original narrative, and we are going to be looking at some very powerful technique of persuasion here that is used by the serpent in order to deceive Adam and Eve. Now, even though this is a negative example, because this power of persuasion is used for trickery, yet I think that we can get great value from how this superior being was able to deceive these perfect beings as they were presented here in the narrative. Okay, now right away we are prepared by the author for what the serpent is going to do, because the serpent here is described as being more crafty than any of the other beasts of the field. Okay, so we are kind of prepared for what is about to happen by the storyteller here, by telling us, well, the serpent is shrewd, he's crafty, and so he's about to do something that involves some kind of deception or trickery. Now notice here, he said to the woman, "Did God actually say, 'You shall not eat of any tree in the garden'?" Now, notice here the technique of persuasion that he's using. First, we are given a sense of here is Eve. She is standing before the tree and she is looking at this tree that she's not supposed to eat any fruit from this tree. So commonly this is said, well, here the serpent is starting with the conversation that is already in Eve's head. In other words, he is voicing a thought that Eve is thinking. She is looking at this tree, and here the serpent is reflecting her thought by saying, you know, I'm sure you are looking at this tree and you are thinking, well, what would happen if I eat the fruit from this tree? So he starts where Eve is, the point at which she is. And we know that any technique of persuasion that you are going to use, that it's important to start where the prospect is. You have to start with whatever their frustrations are. Many times you say, what is keeping them up at night? What are their aggravations? What are their problems? But the whole point, you have to start on a common ground. Start with where the prospect is. And this is what the serpent is doing here. This is what the serpent is doing here with Eve. He looks at her and realizes, maybe from the look on her face, but he voices what is going on in her head. Did God actually say, you shall not eat of any tree in the garden? Now he slipped in here any tree, because that was not really true. We just read a while ago that the instruction that was given to them was that they can eat from any tree in the garden except one. Okay, but now he is throwing out a bait in not only voicing the thought that is in Eve's head, but he's also making, I would think, a common error, hoping to get her in conversation. He's hoping to get a response from her. And she's now going to come and correct what he says, and now he has her in conversation. And the woman said to the serpent, no, you're wrong, basically. He's saying, we may eat of the trees of the garden, but God said, you shall not eat of the fruit of the tree that is in the midst of the garden, neither shall you touch it, lest you die. Now, let us go back to the first instructions. Let's go back to the first instructions that they were given here. Now, note here that the instruction they were given is that you may surely eat of every tree of the garden, but of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat. For in the day that you eat thereof, you shall surely die. So note here that the original instruction doesn't contain anything at all about touching the tree, about the consequences of touching the tree. But here now we find that Eve is now adding this further detail, and basically she's falling for the same trap that the serpent sets for her. The serpent adds a detail that was not given originally, and she now goes on and she does the same thing. She now adds another detail that was not given. But the most important thing here is that barrier one is broken down, because he now has her thinking, he now has her engaged, he now has her in conversation, the hook has been set, the bait has been set, and she's now involved in conversation. She's on that sugarman slippery slide, as we may say. But she says, but the serpent now responds to the woman and says, you will not surely die. In other words, the serpent is saying, in dying, you shall not really die. Okay, so he's now planting doubt in her mind about the instruction that she was first given. He said, instead, for God knows that when you eat of this tree, your eyes will be open, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. Now many times I've seen, where someone might give credit for a particular persuasion technique to somebody who lived 100 or 200 years ago. And I often smile to myself, because these techniques of persuasion are as old as humanity. They are as old the human race itself. Now, notice here what the great persuader is doing now. He's saying, he just adds one word. You shall not surely die. But he says now, for God, now who is the authority, knows that when you eat of it, your eyes will be open and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. Here he's saying that you can't trust this authority. Actually, this authority is actually hiding something from you. There is something that this authority doesn't want you to know. But if you eat this fruit, you are actually going to become like this authority. In other words, they're holding something back from you. And we see that this is a very common technique that is used in persuasion today. Books that are written by Kevin Trudeau, about cures that doctors don't want you to know, or spin is given to products to say, well, these are things that the gurus don't want you to know, or the government doesn't want you to know. But if you can convince people that there's some authority that is trying to hide some knowledge from them, and you now can become the hero where you're revealing these secrets that this other authority is hiding from you, we find that this is a very common persuasion technique that is used. And here, the serpent is making good use of this technique in order to get Eve on his side. Okay, so he says actually then, no, you don't have to worry about this. God knows that when you eat this, benefits. Your eyes going to be open and you're going to become like God, knowing good and evil. Now we're going to find out in just a moment here that the serpent is here giving half-truths. Okay? He's actually giving half-truths. So he's not telling them an outright lie, but he's giving in half-truths. He says, so when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and that it was delight to the eyes, and that the tree was to be desired to make one wise. What are all these? All these are what? All of these are what? Benefits, benefits, benefits. After you see one, good for food, delightful to the eyes, and to make one wise. All of these are benefits, benefits, benefits. Finally, she took the call to action, and she also gave also to her husband, who also ate. And they say, notice here it says, the serpent said, if you eat this fruit, your eyes are going to be opened. And now here we see, then their eyes were opened. Okay, so again you see, not total deception, but half-truths. And they knew now that they were naked, and they now being embarrassed because they are now naked, they made loincloths from fig leaves. Okay, so here we see then in this old narrative, we see here techniques of persuasion that have been used for many thousands of years, and also is still being used today. As I say, this here we have a negative example of how this technique of persuasion were used, but as a persuader or copywriter or marketer, you can use these same techniques of persuasion, but honestly, where you're actually giving your prospect the benefits that you're really promising. You're not really tricking them. You're not using it for trickery. Just like like water. Water is useful, but of course you drink too much and you can drown. Okay, so here these techniques of persuasion were used to deceive, but yet they are very powerful techniques because they are coming from very powerful. They're coming from someone here who is presenting the narrative as being very powerful, as being very crafty, and we see here that he was able to deceive even people who were not supposed to be so easily deceived. That is how powerful this strategy was. And